joining us this section of panel discussion, Not Your Model Minority, breaking down the model minority myth, stereotype, and how to be vocal in the media. So earlier in the intersectionality panel, they have set us up for the perfect, groundwork so we can build off on top of that. And we have beautiful, amazing panels right here, so I'm gonna ask all of you to introduce yourself because you're amazing. Go ahead.
Hello, my name is Stephanie, she, her. I am a marketing and communications director at the Asian Cultural Council. It's a nonprofit that helps support cultural exchange between artists between the US and Asia. And then at nighttime, I started a podcast called Real Asian Women, Raw, and I just have Asian women come on and talk about whatever they want to talk about and amplify their voices and their stories.
Hello, my name is Chen Osaki. I'm a video producer and audience development strategist. So I've worked with brands in the past, specifically in food, culture, human rights, news, with brands like Now This, Thrillist, Business Insider, and I currently work at Al Jazeera doing international news. And I really have a passion for telling stories from our community and going deeper, not going for the shallow stereotypes, and really telling stories that I think everyone needs to hear.
Hi, I'm Kara Chen. My pronouns are she, her. I am also a video producer. I'm at Insider, which is also formerly known as Business Insider. I currently work there on the Voices of Color team, but I would also say before I started working on that team, I was and still am, a really strong advocate for pushing for representation of underrepresented communities. And so I did that in like short mini docs before that. And yeah, that's pretty much my whole spiel.
Amazing, thank you everyone. And my name is Yuko, and I am also going by she, her. I am a Japanese immigrant, so I'm the crazy one from the family, moved out of our home country and being here. So I want to set up the context of what is model minority first, right? So the term model minority is first used in 1966 by sociologist William Peterson in an article he wrote for the New York Times magazine, which referred to minority groups, so it wasn't specifically for Asians, but a minority group that achieved a high level of success in US society. This has created various consequences between minority groups and amongst the Asian community and the majority. So first, I want to ask everyone, what does model minority myth mean to you, and how have you confronted these stereotypes in your own life?
For me, the model minority myth is super stupid and super dangerous, and it's rooted in white supremacy, and we can't acknowledge its anti-blackness. It's used to pit certain minority groups against other minority groups, and it's not just terrible for different communities of color, it's terrible within the Asian community because it assumes that, all of Asians are supposed to be this double-parent, college-going, successful, math-loving group, when that's not true. We have Bhutanese, Burmese, Vietnamese, Asian groups who come over as refugees, and then they're expected to live up to the standard, and therefore they don't get the help they need. And so it's very problematic. For me personally, it's problematic because I have a younger sister who's a doctor, who's married, has got 2 kids. I have none of those things. And so for me, my whole life, I've struggled with feeling enough with my family and feeling like what I was or what I wanted to do was okay. So I think on multiple levels, it's definitely an issue and something I want to tackle. And that's why I started my podcast, is we are all very different with very different stories and dreams and desires, and yeah.
Honestly, you just took the words right out of my mouth. I mean, I think when it comes to the model minority myth, also it became very popular and prominent after Japanese internment camps. And it was very glossed over in my own history books, like growing up in high school. And if I didn't have my own family telling me their history in their internment camps, like my grandmother was born in one of the camps in Arizona in the desert, and like I have family members who met at my parents' wedding, and they're like, "Oh, I know you from the camps," But it's weird hearing the cultural erasure that came from that after, because when you think of generational trauma, it didn't really hit me until we started talking about it and started being open with each other. And I think that really started strengthening my own relationship with my parents and how we talked about race, especially when we talk about how to help other minorities, other marginalized communities, especially when it comes to what can we do as allies, not even just for our own communities, but how can we outreach to others. And I think that's also what's really important when it comes to the model minority and dismantling it, is also realizing our own privileges and our own disadvantages and how we can help each other up. And I think when it comes to that, realizing how we can break that mold and how we can undo our own biased thinking and how to overcome that, it's our own learning process. It's also very hard. Even for myself, I'm still learning. But basically, like you said, it's terrible, it's hard, and it's definitely based in systemic racism, white supremacy, and also even rooted back into colorism, and just thinking deeply about how it does really create and ingrain harmful bias within each community.
Can I get this lower? I hear feedback, and I think this didn't get changed in the music. So when I think of the terms, it's really strong. When I think of this term, I think it's a myth, right? And I just have one correction. So it was 1966, and it was the first known documentation of the use of that word, but it specifically actually pitted Japanese Americans against Black Americans. And it was basically saying, hey, look, Japanese Americans figured it out, they're successful right now, why can't you do it? That is so harmful, that is so harmful, that is harmful for us, that is harmful for Black Americans. So when I think of the term, I think of how it is rooted in, and thank you so much. I think of that term about how it's rooted in anti-Blackness. And I will say, I do think actually Asian Americans do benefit from it as well, but in the long run we don't, right? So as we've seen, of course, during the pandemic, this year has been very painful. Not just from Atlanta, not just our elders. I have friends my age afraid to go out, afraid to take the subway. Our status as the model minority is completely conditional. Right? It only exists in certain atmospheres or certain environments, and even then it's limited, because I still think that Asian Americans, and especially Asian women, we're just not seen as leaders, we're not seen as being vocal. The term is just so harmful, it erases people's personal successes and challenges. And then it hurts the Black community, and it also hurts really any other community that isn't white, because it's saying they figured it out, but why haven't you? And that's sort of where it came from. I had another thing that I wanted to mention, but I forgot. So you'll come back.
Thank you for the correction. Yeah, the article itself was about Japanese immigrant and how they have made it, so why can't you? Exactly. So I want to bring this conversation back into the media context, as we're all media related. And I want to approach this conversation from two perspectives. And one is from the audience and a media consumer perspective, and the second one is from the creator and producer perspective. And first, again, the intersectionality conversations are really set up the context for us, and then we want to elaborate on them just a little bit. As an audience and media consumer, we've seen a lot, and we've seen so little over the years. So, starting from Yellowface, Anime Wong, and recently they talked about Crazy Rich Asians, and it was the first major feature film that has featured Asian and Asian American cast for 25 years. And they were right. Earlier they said it's good and bad, right? It gives us so much problematic issue. At the same time, we're celebrating that. So the question is, how has the mainstream media paved the way for Asian culture, Asian education and the recognition, and how has mainstream media contribute to model minority myth?
When it comes to like the media, I see it as a cycle. I guess personally, as people who work in the media, you know, we grow up consuming, whether it's books, TV, movies, entertainment of all sorts of shapes and forms, and you know, we grow up seeing people who look like us, and definitely a lot more people who don't look like us, predominantly white media, like celebrities, hosts, experts, especially when they do speak or cover themes that are Asian. So I guess when it comes to us working in media, women of color, Asians, period, people of color, we also want to see more of those stories being told. And I guess from a consumer perspective, it's hard because we want to be able to bring those to life. But it's also hard because we also have to recognize that there is systemic racism and white supremacy also rooted in a lot of major media companies. So with that, we also have to work really hard on dismantling that on a personal level, while also trying to make sure we find stories that don't cater to our Asian stereotypes and cater to a specific audience that is not like Asian. You know, especially when you see a lot of like higher up people saying, okay, so you want to cover this Asian story, so how are we going to make it so like everyone wants to watch it? You know, it should be more focused and centered on these Asian voices because they matter. Like we belong to have our roles in media just like anyone else, not just like the glitzed out Crazy Rich Asians, not just the karate martial arts movies, like the Bruce Lee movies, Netflix and everything. We need to also not just have the immigrant struggle, we also deserve the success stories. We also deserve to have people just be covered because they are living, they are thriving. And I think that's the biggest thing that myself and so many other coworkers and people in media want to see.
So I think for me, when I think of this, when people say the media or media, there's, in my mind, that's like a separation, right? So there's like news media, right? And then there's media like television and movies and everything. So we'll say, I guess I'll start with like the newsroom, which is like part of my job and where I work and everything. I don't read or see everything that we put out. But have I flagged things that were problematic? Yes. And like it falls on, in all of these newsrooms, it falls on the shoulders of people who know and understand like the histories and why something is problematic. And we have to, you know, do that second job. I don't want that second job. Like I have other things to do. I can't be making sure that if we don't get dragged on Twitter, that's not, you know, like it becomes my job, but I don't want to do it, but I also don't want something to be out there that's bad. So I think that like there is this responsibility, and if you are upset by certain coverage or how something is done, then like you should definitely speak up as readers and as viewers, but also know that there's probably someone else at the company who's also fighting for this, and they might be the only person in the room who's speaking up and just not getting heard. You know, when the pandemic hit, I mean, we're talking about now over a year ago, but I know so many people that were fighting for thumbnails not to be of Asian people. It was really harmful. We knew it was going to be harmful, and we were trying to get them to delete them, erase them. Like why, you know, you're talking about COVID in London, why does it have to be an Asian person wearing a mask? Like why? You know, we knew that that was coming because we know our status is conditional and that we aren't the model minority. We're just, you know, touted as the model minority to put other communities down. So the second part of that is that when you say media and you're thinking of television and movies and everything, we need, you know, Jen, you were touching on this, like we need more visibility and diversity of roles. Like I'm enjoying Warrior. Honestly, I enjoy Blade Empire, but like I also want it to not be a big deal that it has to represent us as a whole. That it's just like, okay, but there's a bunch of stuff out there that I can't even keep up, and it also doesn't matter that the characters are Asian. So just some statistics for you guys. So USC Annenberg Inclusion Initiative, they put out reports, and I think they're yearly. So they put out an annual report, and it came out not so long ago, and they looked at from 2007 to 2019, so that's 12 years, and they looked at 1,300 top films, right? How many of those films do you think had a lead API or co-lead? It was 44. Okay, so 44 out of 1,300, it was 3.4%. Where are we? 3.4%. And of those 44 films, 14 of those roles were Dwayne Johnson. Amazing. I love The Rock. I'm a huge fan, but also he can't be holding up all of the API community. Like, where are these other roles? And then also, only six of those 1,300 films had a female API director. So okay, great. Like Chloe Zhao for Nomadland, that's incredible, right? Also, personally, I follow Kathy Yan's story. I follow Ali Wong. I mean, they're out there, but you can still only name them on one hand. It's just we need more, and also, for men too, right? So of those films, more than 50%, it was 58%, all of the men had no romantic love interests. More than 50%. We need better representation that's not, over-sexualization of women, or that they're docile. A lot of these roles were tokenized. They have no speaking lines. I think of, I don't know if you guys watched The Boys, or Umbrella Academy, right? So there's Ben, who's a ghost, and one person can hear him. Oh, great. I can't think of her name right now, but the character in The Boys, she's silent. She has no lines. So I want more, across the board, and then going back to the newsrooms and also actually, and honestly in media too, it's out there, but it's not in the mainstream all the time. Like, you have to look for it.
I was reading that article yesterday, and then they were saying something like, and 25% of us got killed off before the end of the film. And it's almost like a running joke,
right? Yeah. She said she died in all of her films.
Exactly. Like, we're just these side pieces that get killed off, or we don't speak. And I think sometimes the question is, like, let's say I were to talk to my parents about this. They would be like, why are you so angry? It's just movies. Why is it important to have media representation? Because whether we like it or not, we grow up with film, we grow up with books, we grow up with TV, and it informs parts of our identity. When we don't see ourselves, we don't feel beautiful, we don't feel strong, we don't see ourselves as leaders, we don't see ourselves as kicking ass in the boardroom, we're just the secretary on the side typing notes. And when that happens over and over and it becomes part of your internal dialogue, it does make a difference in our real life. So I love what they were saying earlier at the Intermix panel, which is representation is not enough, but I think of it as like a pyramid. It's like awareness is at the bottom. And then, and then you kind of internalize it, and then you advocate. And so, in order to just even be aware that we can be more, we need to see ourselves and our people as being more. And so I think it starts with the media. And I think it's important that we're not just the actors and actresses being bossed around. We need to be the producers. And that's why when I met these two, I was like, awesome, Asian female producers, We need to be more than just the face. We need to be the media moguls, the anchor women and men, the storytellers, the writers, the choreographers, like, in all aspects of creative, we need to be there so we can point it out when we're like, that's not accurate, that's a microaggression, that's just straight up racist. So I think it's fascinating to be here with all these people who feel the same way, and I was telling them, I was like, I'm going to follow your careers and see if one of y'all be the next Chloe Zhao, and it's awesome.
Yeah, and to bounce off of earlier, the first panel, they talked about, when it comes to women who are role models and mentors, it's one of those things where it's like, I think we have to become it before I find it. That's a direct quote. And when I actually wasn't, just for transparency, I was an intern when I met Kara. And when I saw her, I took a deep breath and I was like, oh my God, I found you. I was like, I'm an Asian woman. I'm
Not a lot of us.
I know, exactly. And I think also going back into it, especially being stereotyped as an Asian woman in the workplace and working with a lot of white men managers. I mean, I think you guys might have an idea where this is going, but I think when they expect a certain behavior from you, especially being complicit and going with the flow, and then you're just kind of sitting there and just being angry, and then just voicing your opinion and knowing that your voice matters and that you can implement change, like Kara has been doing, like everyone has been trying to do, like people of color, like the weight of trying to get these stories told and trying to dismantle racism in our own workplaces is such an exhausting extra side gig. It's a terrible way to say that we have free labor, for emotional labor for that, but I think that's where consumers do come into play, like Kara did talk about, like when it comes to holding media outlets accountable for the reporting, like language, how they describe Asians, how they describe Asian Americans, how they describe anyone across like marginalized communities, like that matters, and we are working on it.
So just, I have one thought, just because of what both of you were saying, but I also feel like I have to tell these stories because if I don't, who will? Right? Or if I don't push to produce this because I know of a story, then who's gonna do it? Like, we have to.
I love that. I'm just gonna go off script. Is that okay? Okay, I had a set of questions, but this is like, no, this is not happening. Great, I love that. So, okay, I'm gonna ask a selfish question, sorry guys. But as an immigrant, I grew up watching all these movies back home in Japan. So talk about actual representation, and from a Japanese person who lived in Japan, right? All these white people, actors playing these characters were good for economy, and I'm like, oh, so-and-so from Hollywood is playing this story and that story. So on an international context, like, it's a completely different, I had a completely different impact on that. So in regards to accurate representation, for example, I'm curious, because Asians are not monolith. So when you see Asian people playing Chinese character, or like Memoirs Geisha, or Warriors, and when it comes to that, like how do you think those are impacting the monolith narrative, or the lack of disparity and the different type of Asian stories? What do you think of those?
Part of me is okay with Japanese characters playing Chinese because no one's going up to a Scottish character and saying you're not Irish or you're not British. I think that's okay. I understand it's difficult because in general we're not getting enough jobs. So we're not getting enough of these roles anyway, so when a Japanese actor or when a Chinese actor is taking the place of a Memoirs of a Geisha actor who could be Japanese, I can see how that's problematic. Something maybe a little sidebar is what actually bothers me a lot is, I don't know if y'all are Netflix watching, like a lot of times the main roles are not just, like they have to be part white in order to be the male love interest. Or they need to be part white in order to be beautiful enough to be like this sultry woman. And so when it comes down to intersectionality, I feel like that's kind of the bigger question. Like, honestly, they'll look at you and they'll be like, Japanese, Korean, Chinese, I don't know, But it's very clear to me that in Hollywood, unless we're a little bit white, sometimes I feel like it's like we're not beautiful enough. If the men are not tall and part white, Assam, Henry Golding, there's just so many in my head where it's like the men are all part because they have a little bit of Eurasianness. That bothers me.
Yeah, so I also agree in terms of, I don't think you need to be Chinese to play a Chinese character, you can be Japanese to play a Chinese character. I agree with you in terms of, I think part of why, there are people who are leads and they are not they're only part Asian. I wonder if it's because like it's features or colorism, you know, really. I mean, I don't, it's one of those things though, it's like I don't want them not to have these roles, I want them to also prosper, but again, it's like, wouldn't that be wonderful where there are so many roles and there are so many leads that it doesn't really matter if they're only part Asian.
I love all this. So we're already talking a little bit more about, I think we're all talking about both producing side and audience side all at the same time. There's no way of dividing one or the other, so we're going to keep continuing that with questioning. And specifically, two of you have shared about how audience wants to see what is more receptive to the audience versus what you want to see, what you want to share. The stories that you want to share are different from what company allows you to share actually. How do you combat that, and how do you keep fighting that, and how do you think, what do you want to see moving forward?
So there's always constraints, right? So I don't publish things independently, I publish them for Insider. So I have to run things up the chain, and there's also just restrictions, like how long the video should be, right? And also how much time I have to make it. So I just work within those constraints. I mean, when I moved over to Voices of Color, the team, it was not really a surprise to anyone. You know, because I'm really vocal about these issues that were, and you know, part of my job is to highlight certain voices, and I will always choose underrepresented communities when I can. I will say that there are challenges, right? So there's, I mean, white supremacy is literally everywhere, and so if I want to find a source that isn't white and isn't a white male, sometimes it's just really hard. I mean, right now I'm telling specific stories, but sometimes when you go back into history, who is the person who wrote the book? And it ends up being a white person. And it's like, but I work in video, so I don't want my whole video to be white people explaining issues that are non-white, about non-white communities. So it's just a challenge. I think, so the other part of the question was like, how do I, you know, I mean, if I could sell the story idea to my editor, then it's a go, right? So I just know like the style, the parameters that I have, and like that's how I pitch the stories. So even just like when you're a freelancer and you pitch stories to a media outlet, media organization, I have to pitch them to my editor. And sometimes my editor's not sold and I have to keep pushing, or I have to convince my editor, just like any freelancer would.
Yeah, that's a similar to Kara I've had. It's like the same thing across many media companies where we do have to work with very specific constraints. And that also limits our ability to tell the stories at the depth and, you know, go through the different intricacies that we wish we could. It's hard. It's a challenge. It really is. That's why I think I wish we had more representation, diversity within our industry as well, to really figure out and, you know, manage our way through that. And especially that is also why it's so important to have diverse upper management as well, to also help us tell these stories and also like allow us to tell these stories through the lens of someone from that community or someone from a marginalized community. I know, I honestly, I think all the things that I wish I could tell are the things that I wish could be constrained to like a 30-second, a 90-second video, or a tweet, or something that would attention grab someone in the first couple seconds of a video, so until we reach like the ad break. You know, in the end, it's all capitalism too. What's really difficult, especially what Kara talked about, is when you are trying to pitch these stories to your manager and, you know, you're really passionate about, you know, the story that is a big part of your culture, but they don't understand why. And you're like, yeah, but why would other viewers care? And I think that's why diversity matters and inclusion matters, is because then we wouldn't have to fight so hard to be like, this is why it matters to me, this is why we need to tell these stories, because if we don't tell these stories, then our audience will know, like people like me, people like you, will be able to see that our stories matter, you know? And I think that's what leads to like a really, what kind of can sometimes feel like a shallow interpretation of who Asians really are in our culture. I know I really wish I had all the time and resources in the world, like to really just dive deep and like, you know, talk to chefs and talk about their food and not through the lens of, ooh, it's weird, it's spicy, it's alive, you know? Yeah, exactly. Like, I don't want to get deep, like, who taught you how to cook? Where'd you learn how to, like, plate this way? Did you, like, do you believe that French technique is the best technique if you're running a Vietnamese restaurant? Like, why does like mainstream media think this is so important? Like, to dive deeper. Like, what does it truly mean to have authenticity in a dish? What does it mean to, like, what's the difference between people considering something to be appropriation versus something that's actually appreciation and also evolution of food? And I mean, this doesn't apply to food, it applies to fashion, it applies to, you know, any other field that, you know, it ties back to culture.
It's a big weight too, I would say. So I have to hold myself back from trying to put everything in every video. Like every story, and I will also say I also write, I also take photos, you know, just there's a constraint, there's a time constraint. Who's gonna watch a 40-minute video, you know, so I can't make those kinds of things, but I'm sorry, speaking exclusively on YouTube or Twitter or Instagram. So when I do a story, just know that I know 3 times as much. Like there's 2/3 of information that just didn't make it into the video. And I'm trying to also this is just one video. You know, I'm gonna keep making more. It's just something I have to tell myself because, you know, I can't put everything in one video or one story. And then, you know, there's so many stories out there too. It's like you also have to keep going and, I don't know, there's so many stories to tell.
Can I ask you two a question? As y'all were talking, I heard a lot of limitations. I have to ask, I have to push, I have to whatever. And it reminds me of the panel earlier when Jenny was like, F's trying to make a seat at this table, let's make our own table. Are there Asian production companies out there? And can we crowdsource an Asian production company and just run our own stuff on the side? You know? Like, I'm tired of asking for permission and justifying our existence and our ideas. Can we just make our own? Like, right now?
Yeah, we don't have to explain why something is a thing or not a thing or
You
why
think I'm
it's a
kidding,
thing.
but I'm not. I'm going to reach out to y'all and we're going to talk about this.
Well, it's actually kind of funny because Karen and I texted after we first started talking as a panel, and we're like, hey, should we just start our own media company? I mean, I know it's expensive and lots of time, fancy cameras and everything, but you should do it.
Well, that's why women directors, like women directors in Hollywood started making their own production companies, Drew Barrymore, Jennifer Aniston, because they weren't getting the roles unless they were 25 and under. So then they created their own production companies and they could tell their own story. Why can't Asians do the same?
Yeah, I think it's also hard too because I guess being in these companies where they're, I guess, like the sad truth, I guess, behind it is like it's definitely a product of just a lot of money and resources. I think sometimes, I don't know, because I'm speaking on my own experience and it's definitely something that I'm trying to dismantle, but sometimes when you're surrounded by so many people who don't look like you, who are actively benefiting off of a lot of privilege, and like especially it's like monetary or resources, you're kind of like, wow, this is very overwhelming. How can I do this? And I think that's where, whether it is any diversity initiative in the office, whether it is, you know, just within our own community, like that's where power of numbers come in. That's why this is important, like our collective energy and our collective desire to want more and then now do more.
Coalition building.
Yeah.
It's so funny we're talking about starting an own media company. I was actually talking to producers from all Asian cast of Gentleman's Guide. They're doing the fundraiser for Stop AAPI campaign, and how hard it is to reach Asian folks to open up their wallet. So there's a disconnect between media or any arts industry and the rest of the sector. So I think that's another bridge that we get to cross, and as well as that's another layer or the aspect of the model minority, right? This mass media or the alter culture, unless you're classical pianist or flutist, like you're not considered, that's a different type of art. And so I first want to commend all of you for being the breaker and change maker in this industry and sharing your voice. And I'm gonna want to ask you a question, Seth, because your podcast, and this is something that we talked about during the pre-call, and I was fascinated as you're getting inquiry from non-Asian folks to be on your podcast, and you reach out to Asian women to share their story, and they said, no, my story is not good enough. So how do you encourage Asian and Asian American as a whole to start speaking up more of our story? Because I think that's part of it, right? Asian people are told, or often told, not to be so loud, not to speak about yourself, be modest. And so how do you encourage people?
I mean, all of that stems from my own issues and my own childhood traumas when I was told, be modest, be quiet, be less, whatever I was, be less of that. And I think I'm going to make some generalizations. Men tend to feel more comfortable speaking up than women. White people tend to feel more comfortable speaking up than Asians. And non-immigrants tend to feel more comfortable speaking up in the country of their birth than immigrants, right? So you layer all that together with Asian women immigrants, and you have people who are just like, okay? So when I started my podcast, I reached out first to friends and family, and they were happy to share their stories. As I went outside of that hole, and the podcast started going, people, men, would message me and say, I really resonate with that story. Can I be a guest? And I was like, that's interesting. But very rarely would women go outside of their realm and go into a male podcast and be like, hey, I'm not a male, but can I speak on that? It's just, I don't know what it is. Biology, I have no idea. So lots of times I would actually have to go to women and be like, Yuko, you really have a great story. And they'd be like, no, I'm not that interesting. I'm not a great speaker. Oh, you've heard this. And I would have to say, no, you're fascinating, you're interesting, you're unique, I want to hear about you. And I have done this with every single woman on my podcast. They all sound great, they're amazing afterwards. But in the beginning, I definitely see a trend where I've had many men say, I would love to be on, and I've had a few. But the space is reserved for Asian women for that reason, is because we don't speak up enough.
Have you, have either of you reached out to Asian community and said, no, I don't want to share my story? Just curious. So,
Wait, have we asked someone and they said no?
yeah.
Oh, I thought you guys were producers.
I mean, I want to say mostly no. I mean, I guess it's a little bit, they usually want to, sometimes it's just scheduling and doesn't work out.
The one instance that I do get uneasiness is if there are cultural barriers. But that's like our job. I guess like what I wanted to do as a producer was also create a space that was more inclusive for us to help them. So I worked on a series once where I wanted to focus a small Korean barbecue restaurant in Southern California, but the owners only spoke Korean. So I outsourced and I found someone to translate, to be on site and translate so they could speak comfortably in their native language, in Korean, and we had someone also help translate subtitles. And I think that sense of accessibility is also something that we can work around to really try hard and really do our best and do as much as we can to support these different communities as well. I mean, there's small steps, but I think I wish a lot more people outside of our own communities would think. I mean, I guess non-BIPOC producers and other people, content creators would also consider it as well, because it's definitely not considered as much. Just the little things.
So if you can ask for one immediate change for all media creators or companies to ask one step that you can ask immediate change, what would that be?
Give
I don't know if there's one thing.
Give us
That's
more money.
the problem.
I have 20.
Yeah.
Time.
It's not just one thing, right?
Right.
It's something we've been talking about throughout, which is that racism is systemic, and the people in power, and if you look at media organizations, they are white. and most often they're white men. So that's one change, maybe. I would love to see more women of color in power. That's probably the one thing.
And to jump off of that, to also have company cultures and resources to also maintain and keep BIPOC talent, Asian talent, especially when it comes to we already deal with microaggressions at work. I've been at a job where someone called me by the wrong Asian woman's name for the whole time I was there. Certain things like that, it's already hard enough. I think it would be nice to just have a safe place to work where I can do my job and do it at my best, and also feel free to pitch stories I'm actually passionate about. That's my one wish, I think.
You know my wish. Give us a separate building, let us run our shows, give us a company, give us money, and then leave us alone.
Yeah,
That's a great action step.
and then an Oscar.
I would love to open up if anybody has a question for these amazing ladies. Go ahead.
I'm Bangladeshi American, I'm Muslim. So, one thing that's been going on right now, and this affects Asians because, 25% of Asians are Muslim. So what happened in Jerusalem, in Palestine, right? And they literally bombed Masjid al-Aqsa, the mosque, one of the holiest sites in Islam, during Ramadan, right? And the news isn't even talking about it, right? CNN, they bombed Al Jazeera. They bombed Al Jazeera, and I don't even know what insiders were. I wouldn't be surprised if they're not even posting it, right? So, like you were saying, there are two different types of media, right? There's entertainment and then there's news, right? So this is literally censorship that we're seeing. This is like a cyber war that's happening right now, information. What can we do? Because right now, thank God, I don't know why people are understanding our struggle. Because never before have people cared about this. We're in the bottom of the barrel in that sense, right? But now, thank God, I don't know why people care, but we're grateful, right? And it's because of Instagram posts and stuff like that, which is crazy, right? But what more can we do right now, right?
I completely can hear and feel your same emotions. I worked at Al Jazeera. I was coming off the end of the shift when I saw that the building was bombed in Gaza. It seems because also as an American working at a more international, that not an American-facing news company, not a U.S.-based news company, seeing the disparity in language and also seeing the shift in views and the differences in the polarization, especially when it comes to human conflict, such as what's happening between Palestine and Israel, especially when it comes to fighting, hate, active hate, in our country and in our world. My advice is to diversify the media you consume. Fight misinformation and try and find, you have to just really combat misinformation. I know it's really hard and you're like, how do I find a credible source? I think that also you have to also consider who's the oppressor and who's being oppressed. And I think that's hard too because, when you are getting your information from primarily certain, U.S. news outlets who are always seeing it from an American point of view, it can be very frustrating if you hear perspectives from other people who see the conflict in a different way and understanding. And also what's important too is doing your own research and going into the history of the conflict itself. What is the background of these two groups? Don't just listen to what, what should I say, congressmen are saying. They're definitely people who don't know the full story. I think what's important now is to also hold media companies accountable. We are powerful in numbers. We are also humans. We also have hearts, and we're also trying to figure out exactly like, how are we gonna leave our mark on this world? Yeah, so as our part as humans is to like really band together and voice our demands, and also really think about, as humans, how can we help other humans? How can we really use our collective voices? Like, even if it's like donating even a little bit, if it's sharing information on social media, yes, that's great, but also looking and seeing the information, embedding it to make sure you're not just sharing it blindly. And also think deeply about like what message and what words you are sharing too, because language, of course, coming from someone who worked in media, language is important, communication is the most important. Hopefully that answers your question.
I hate social media, but I also do it because it's my job. But for me, a really easy, quick win is, I don't know if y'all have been seeing Biden's Instagram, but people are on there going free Palestine, right? Just like, I like to do that. Sometimes people are like, why do you spend all this time writing all this stuff on social media? To me, there is power in those numbers. So on Biden, on CNN, on everything, I just go there and I do the same thing. I social media on them. And you can do this when you're on the toilet. You know, like, it doesn't take a lot of time. Like, I know y'all are on your phones right before bedtime, you shouldn't, but you do it. So it takes like 5 seconds a day, and I make sure I media bomb like something, and I say something about something I don't like. Hey, that's racist. Hey, care about Palestine. So, I mean, I try to do that as much as I can. I know we can't all donate, but I think there's a lot of little things we can do with social media, especially this generation, that you can make your voice heard and just say, I don't care that you just saw the Easter Bunny Biden. I want you to, you know, address this. So I think it's fast and easy. 30 seconds a day.
So I'll say so I'm a video producer, I work on a specific team and in a certain medium. So I can't, it's like anyone at any big company, I only have so much power that I can, I only have so much power. I think, so what Jen is saying too, I agree in terms of, you do need to diversify where you're getting your information, and it's interesting what you said, because I first thought of, actually, it was just someone on TikTok that really explained things in a way that I understood, right? He's not even connected to a media organization. The way that we consume things, how we consume them, what platform, like, it always changes. I honestly think it's a little bit sad in terms of, I do think that people have to have the skills of a journalist to read and understand the news. Because you, as journalists, we have to ask ourselves, why does this matter? Why are you telling us now? You know, who is saying this? How do they know that? And how do they know that it's very big? And that's, you know, how you get to a credible source, and you say like, okay, this is a reliable, credible source. And I guess I'm saying it's sad because people need to figure out how to read the news. You know, I still think about like fake news and where people are getting their information, and just because it is a big name brand, you know, who's the writer, who's the editor? You know, who put this out? All these places are big organizations. So you just have to, I don't know, you have to keep questioning things. And, you know, I'm glad you brought that up.
Also, a rule of thumb is never read the headline and assume it's the full story. Like, always read the whole article first before sharing it. I mean, there's a reason why Instagram did the whole, or Twitter did the whole, like, retweet, like, read before retweeting. Like, it's actually very important because it sometimes because stories sometimes go out so quickly, like, it doesn't show the complete scope of what's going on in the world, too. So that's just my quick tip, just if it helps you consume any sort of journalism a little bit better. It'll help you understand more.
Thank you, everyone. I'm taking it in. I didn't blank out. I was just observing all this wonderful message. Any other questions? Okay, cool. So I would love to close this segment with, I would love to ask all of you, like, if there's any one call to action or while you're consuming or when you're creating anything that you would like for anybody here to take an action in regards to demystifying the whole non-minority myth?
This sounds cheesy, but just be you and more of you and more loudly and more unapologetically. If your white coworkers can tell you about their weekend with their dog and their niece and their nephew, you can speak up about your friend getting spit on because they're Asian. You know, like take up that space wherever you are and whatever platform you have and just do it loudly and don't think about permission, don't think about approval, just do it.
And also, if you do see stories from like the Asian community that you think should be shared, absolutely share it. Like, show your support for it. Give feedback that this is what you want and this is what you care about. Because also, seeing that also helps us know that we're doing the right thing. Or if we're not, obviously too. If something's not right, let us know too. But I mean, honestly, the whole goal here is, as consumers and producers, is that we create a healthy symbiotic relationship where we're able to really show the full breadth of what the Asian community can be and beyond.
Just one thing.
I know that's a
So I am a big fan of understanding history and not repeating it, but also understanding where everyone is coming from. So I highly suggest Asian Americans on PBS. I think it's streaming right now on Amazon, but I think it was also for this month streaming on PBS's website. There are things that I learned there that I just had no idea. You know, third world liberation. I think there's been solidarity with the Black and Asian community that people sometimes forget. And yeah, I don't know, keep questioning all the systems in place that keep certain people of color out of power.
Thank you very much, everyone. And my call to action is, if you learn anything, share it with one person that you care about. That's my call to action. And that being said, please give up for all these beautiful cows.